Okay, so today we're going on, well, it might seem like kind of a weird deep dive.
Hmm.
We're going to be starting with something so basic, something, we encounter every day, the meter. I
Okay.
mean, we just take it for granted. It's a measurement,
Okay.
right? But what is it
Yeah.
really? And
Yeah.
how did we come to this agreed upon definition? You sent over some really interesting stuff on philosophy, and
Yeah.
I have a feeling this is going to take us down some unexpected paths.
You are absolutely right.
Okay.
It's anything but simple. The journey of kind of how we define a meter, like, really mirrors these bigger questions we have about knowledge and certainty and how we understand,
Yeah.
as humans, the world around us.
Okay, I'm intrigued. I'm intrigued.
Yeah.
Let's start then with like the meter itself.
That's-
What's the philosophical backstory there?
Well, let's rewind the clock a little bit, back to 1791.
Okay.
The French Academy of Sciences, in their quest for, order and reason, they decided to tackle this kind of chaotic world of measurements.
Right.
Their solution: define the meter as a fraction of the Earth's circumference.
Oh, wow.
Elegant.
Yeah.
Tying a human system
Very grand.
to the natural world.
Yeah. Makes sense. Very logical.
But
But I'm guessing.
not quite that straightforward.
Yeah, it's never that easy, is it?
Never that easy. No.
So even with like the best astronomical measurements, it wasn't perfect, right?
Not quite. And, even then, they ended up being slightly off,
Oh, no.
which highlights,
So what happened? Did they just keep using this sort of slightly wrong measurement?
well, eventually they needed a more kind of like reliable standard.
Right. Okay.
So for a while, what they relied on was a physical meter stick,
Huh.
a platinum bar, kept very carefully in Paris.
Oh, wow.
It's almost comical when you think about it.
Yeah.
From the Earth's circumference to
Yeah.
a hunk of metal in a vault.
A very literal definition of a meter then.
Right.
But even that wasn't the end of the story, right?
You know it, always striving for more accuracy. The problem with a physical object is that, well, it can change, even slightly,
Right.
with temperature or over time.
Yeah.
Plus, it's really hard to replicate it perfectly for use in other labs around the world.
Right, right.
So in 1960, we enter the world of atomic measurement. The meter was redefined, this time based on the wavelength of krypton radiation.
Okay, that feels like a huge leap.
Right.
Suddenly we're not talking about planets or even like physical objects anymore. We're talking about like
Yeah.
the building blocks of matter.
The very building blocks.
What was the thinking there?
It offered that level of precision and consistency which they couldn't get before.
Okay, yeah.
Krypton's wavelength is incredibly stable and measurable by labs anywhere in the world,
Right, right.
which is important because a standard isn't very useful if it can't be reliably replicated, right?
Ye- It's like we keep refining our tools, to get closer and closer to this like ideal.
Yeah,
But even then it changes.
it does.
Today I read that the meter is actually defined by the speed of light itself.
Exactly. The distance light travels in a tiny fraction of a second. The most fundamental,
Yeah.
constant thing we know of.
From the earth to a metal bar to an element to like
Yeah.
a fundamental force of the universe.
It's pretty wild.
It's mind-boggling, honestly, when you lay it out like that. But
Oh,
I
yeah.
see what you mean about like this mirroring kind of our pursuit of knowledge, right?
Yeah.
We keep trying to get to like a more precise definition of things.
Yeah.
But it makes me wonder though, like what is the krypton of our thoughts,
Right.
our beliefs?
Hmm.
How do we establish those measuring sticks for what we hold to be true?
And that is where philosophy comes in.
Okay.
Just like redefining the meter,
Yeah,
our understanding of knowledge itself has gone through its own
right.
really fascinating evolution.
So who are some of the key thinkers we should turn to then
Yeah.
for guidance on this like quest for knowledge journey?
Well, one name really towers above the rest when it comes to seeking like really firm foundations for knowledge. And that is René Descartes.
Okay.
He really wanted to pinpoint
Yeah.
with absolute certainty what we could say we truly know,
Right, right. Ah, Descartes.
Yeah.
I've always found that his idea of I think, therefore I am,
Yeah.
very intriguing, though I'll admit sometimes it feels a bit like a philosophical fortune cookie,
Yeah.
Can you help me go a bit deeper than that? What led him to that idea?
It's a phrase that's like often quoted without the full context of his work, which is a shame.
Right.
It's because there's so much more to it than that. You have to remember, Descartes was living during a time of just massive intellectual upheaval.
Mm.
Like Old authorities were being questioned.
Right.
Traditional systems of thought were being overturned.
Yeah.
It was the age of scientific discovery, but also a time of immense uncertainty.
So he was basically trying to hit the reset button on knowledge itself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And his method for doing that was radical, to say the least.
Okay.
It's called appropriately radical doubt.
Okay, I'm already feeling a bit anxious.
Right.
What did this, like, radical doubt entail? Doubting everything.
Yeah.
All the time.
It wasn't meant to be a way of life, more like a thought experiment.
Okay.
A way to just demolish any shaky foundations and just see what remains standing.
Right.
He had these specific arguments for doubt, as this excerpt called them.
Okay.
And they were designed to challenge our usual ways of thinking.
Give me an example.
Sure.
What kind of things did Descartes want us to doubt?
Well, he starts with something I think many of us have experienced: how our senses can deceive us.
Okay.
Think optical illusions, mirages in the desert,
Hey.
even mishearing a song lyric.
Oh, totally. I've fallen for those impossible shape illusions more times than I'd like to admit.
Right.
It makes you realize how easily your brain can be tricked.
Exactly. So our senses aren't infallible.
Yeah.
So there's not a very solid base for knowledge.
Right.
But then he takes it a step further with this, like, dream argument. How do we really know with 100% certainty that we're not dreaming right now?
Oh, yeah. That one's always a bit unsettling.
Right.
Especially because some dreams can feel so real, and it's only afterwards you think, like, wait, that was impossible.
Right.
That didn't happen.
And his point wasn't to say that life is a dream, but that we can't use our current experience as proof that it isn't.
Yeah.
There's always that, like, little sliver of doubt.
Right.
And then there's his most, I guess, extreme argument,
Okay.
what's often called the evil demon hypothesis.
Well, that one definitely sounds
Right.
a bit ominous.
A little bit, yeah. Imagine this powerful, deceptive being, like a demon,
Right.
who's messing with our perception of reality.
Oh, okay.
Now, I know it sounds a little outlandish,
Yeah.
but again, it's a thought experiment.
Right.
Could even our most basic beliefs
Yeah.
be the result of some external manipulation?
So it's like The Matrix, but instead of sentient machines, it's a
Yeah.
philosophical demon playing mind games.
Pretty much. And the point, again, isn't to prove that this demon actually exists.
Right.
It's more to push that doubt to its absolute limit.
Okay.
If such a being could exist, even hypothetically,
Right.
then we can't fully trust even our own minds as a source of truth.
Okay. I'm starting to see where this is going.
Yeah.
And it's not looking good for my sense of certainty about, well, anything.
Right.
If we can't trust our senses or our experience of, reality as we perceive it,
Yeah.
what are we left with, according to Descartes?
Here's where he pivots to that famous phrase,
Okay.
cogito ergo sum.
Right.
I think, therefore I am.
Yeah.
Even if I doubt absolutely everything,
Yeah.
even my own existence, the very act of doubting proves that something exists to do the doubting.
Right. There has to be a thinker
Yeah.
having the thought, even if the thought itself is about whether or not the thinking is real, right?
Exactly.
It's a bit of a mind pretzel
It is.
when you think about it too long.
Yeah.
But I get it, and that was his bedrock of certainty.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
That was it. So from there, he starts to rebuild.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got our foundation. I think, therefore I am.
Right.
What's the next layer in Descartes' reconstruction of knowledge?
Hmm.
How do we get from just our own minds to the existence of, well, everything else?
It's interesting you phrase it as reconstruction.
Yeah.
A lot of philosophers after him pointed out that he wasn't merely uncovering some pre-existing truth,
Right.
but building a system,
Yeah.
much like how our definition of the meter is a human construct.
Right. Okay.
But to answer your question,
Yeah.
Descartes brings in God.
Okay, this should be good.
Right.
Descartes and his philosophical proof for God, lay it on me.
So it's more of a logical argument than like a theological one.
Okay.
He starts with this idea that we, as humans, flawed as we are, we can still conceive of a perfect being, God, but
Yeah.
how could we, as imperfect beings, generate the idea of perfection on our own?
That's a really interesting question. It's like if we're capable of imagining something beyond our own limitations, then doesn't that imply that
Yeah.
something else must have put that idea there to begin with?
Precisely.
Okay.
Descartes argues that the very concept of a perfect God must have been placed in us by something perfect,
Right.
implying God's existence.
So it's almost like reverse engineering the idea of God working backwards from like the
Yeah.
concept to its origin.
Exactly. And because God is perfect, Descartes then argues God wouldn't create a world designed to deceive us.
Okay.
Our senses might be flawed,
Yeah.
but there must be a real external reality underlying our perceptions.
Right.
Otherwise, God would be a deceiver, and that contradicts the very definition of perfection.
Okay, so it's like a cosmic trust fall,
Right.
We have to trust that God wouldn't create a reality where our senses are constantly leading us astray.
Exactly.
But wasn't there pushback on that reasoning, though?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
One big criticism is that Descartes seems to assume the very thing he's trying to prove.
Right.
To argue for God's existence, he relies on this idea of a perfect being.
Yeah.
But where did that idea come from?
Right.
If it's just an idea in our heads, how can we be sure it corresponds to something,
Yeah.
real outside of our minds?
Right. It's a bit like using the dictionary to define a word.
Yes.
And the definition uses that same word again. It's like circular logic.
Yeah.
Which, if we think about it, brings us back to the meter.
Right.
We defined it based on the earth, then a bar of metal.
Yeah.
Each definition relies on something that came before it, something we already assume to be accurate.
What a fantastic connection.
Right.
And that's where another giant of philosophy comes in,
Okay.
John Locke.
Okay.
He had a very different take on how we acquire knowledge,
Okay.
one that really resonated with the scientific thought of the time.
Okay, so if Descartes is all about innate ideas and this kind of
Yes.
architectural approach to rebuilding knowledge,
Right.
what's Locke's perspective? Give me the counterpoint.
So Locke believed that we are born as blank slates.
Okay.
Tabula rasa is the fancy Latin term he used.
Right.
All our knowledge, he argued, comes from experience,
Okay.
from our senses interacting with the world around us.
So complete opposite then of Descartes' starting point.
Yeah.
But for Locke, it's not about uncovering some pre-existing truth. It's about
Right.
how our experiences shape our understanding of what is true.
Exactly.
It feels very empirical, very grounded in the world.
Exactly. Our minds at birth are like empty vessels,
Right.
and they're gradually filled by the sensations, the reflections, the associations that we gather through life.
Okay, I can get behind that.
Yeah.
We taste something sweet, we see the color red.
Right.
These experiences form the building blocks of our understanding.
Yes.
But how does Locke explain more complex ideas?
Yeah.
The ones that go beyond those basic senses.
So he uses the example of an apple,
Okay.
which I love because it's so simple, but it's also really profound. He talks about how we build from those simple sensations. The apple's redness, its roundness, its sweetness,
Right.
to these more complex ideas.
Okay.
We might remember enjoying apples before. We associate the taste with autumn.
Yeah.
Maybe we connect it to stories or myths we've heard.
Right.
All of these layers build upon those initial sensory experiences.
So it's not just about seeing red, it's about everything that red comes to mean for you.
Exactly.
Right.
And Locke took this even further.
Okay.
He distinguished between what he calls primary and secondary qualities.
Ooh, philosophical jargon. I love it. Break it down for me.
All right, so primary qualities,
Yeah.
Locke argued, are inherent to the object itself.
Okay.
An apple's size, shape, mass.
Yeah.
Those exist, whether we're here to perceive them or not.
Right.
They're independent of our experience.
An apple doesn't suddenly become less round because I close my eyes.
Exactly.
Right.
But then there are secondary qualities. These are things like color, taste, smell. They depend on our perception, on that interaction between the object and our senses.
So my experience of the apple's redness might be different from yours depending on
Exactly.
how our eyes perceive those wavelengths of light or even,
Right.
our cultural associations with the color red.
Locke is saying that those secondary qualities
Right.
are more about our subjective experience,
Right.
not objective truths about the apple itself,
Okay.
which, as you can imagine, opens up a whole new can of philosophical worms.
Because if everything we know is filtered through our individual experiences,
Yeah.
how can we be certain about anything at all?
Right.
It's like we're back to square one, but instead of doubting everything, we're embracing the subjectivity of it all.
And that is exactly the kind of question
Right.
that philosophers like George Berkeley just jumped on.
Okay.
He looked at Locke's ideas and said, okay, if all we know is our perceptions, how could we be sure the external world even exists independently of our minds?
Oh boy. I knew we were heading for some next level mind-bending territory.
Right.
So what did Berkeley propose?
Yeah.
Does the apple only exist if we're looking at it?
It's not even just that your idea of the apple's redness is subjective. It's that for Berkeley, there is no redness out there in the world unless a mind is there to perceive it.
Okay, so the apple only exists if I'm looking at it. That's what he's saying.
Pretty much. He's famous for that phrase, esse is percipient.
Right.
To be perceived.
Yeah.
He took Locke's empiricism
Yeah.
and just ran with it to its most extreme conclusion,
Right.
arguing that things only exist insofar as they're being perceived by a mind.
Okay, I'm going to need a minute to process this.
It's a lot.
So to use the classic example, if a tree falls in the forest and no one's around to hear it,
Yeah.
for Berkeley, it doesn't make a sound.
You got it. For Berkeley, that falling tree only exists as an idea when a mind perceives it, whether that's, a squirrel, another tree, a human who comes along later.
So what's keeping the entire universe from, blinking out of existence?
Right.
Every time we blink or turn our backs, this is where I assume God gets roped back into the picture.
Berkeley was deeply religious, and his solution was basically that God's mind is always perceiving everything.
Right.
Which ensures that, existence continues. God, in a way, becomes like this ultimate observer,
Okay.
keeping the universal apple shaped, even when we're not looking at it.
That's quite an image.
Right.
Okay, I have to admit this is a pretty wild concept to wrap my head around. But even setting aside the theological implications here,
Yeah.
it feels strangely relevant to our world today, the virtual reality simulations, all these questions about what even is reality?
That's incredibly relevant. He's really asking us to think about what do we even mean by real?
Right.
And how much of our perceived reality is just a construct of, our own mind.
Right, yeah.
But even before virtual reality came along, philosophers were grappling with these questions.
Yeah.
Take David Hume, for example.
Okay.
He agreed with Berkeley's critique of Locke,
Okay.
but took skepticism about knowledge to a whole other level.
Oh boy, I'm both fascinated and slightly terrified to hear where this is going.
Right.
What did Hume zero in on?
Well, he questioned just about everything, including things that, we usually take for granted,
Gotcha.
like the idea of a stable self.
Hold on, he's questioning the I in I think, therefore I am. That feels like fighting words to a staunch Cartesian.
Right. Hume was a philosophical rebel.
Yeah.
He argued that when we actually examine our own minds, we never find this solid, unchanging entity called the self.
Okay.
All we find are fleeting thoughts, feelings, sensations.
So I'm less of a unified me, more like a constantly changing stream of consciousness.
Exactly.
Okay.
And this skepticism, it extended to other core concepts like causality.
Right.
Something we even talked about with our humble meter.
Yeah.
He argued that causality is something that our minds impose on the world, not something we actually directly observe.
Okay. I have a feeling that one needs a bit of unpacking.
Sure.
What's wrong with assuming that, one thing causes another?
Yeah.
It seems it's so basic.
Right. It seems very fundamental to how we understand the world.
Yeah.
So Hume's famous example is a billiard ball, hitting another billiard ball.
Okay.
We see one ball hit the second, and we say the first ball caused the second one to move.
Right. Seems obvious.
Seems very obvious. But Hume's point was we never actually observe the cause itself.
Right.
That force passing between them.
We just see one event and then the other and connect them in our minds.
Exactly.
Okay.
So just because we observe event A followed by event B, that doesn't necessarily mean that A caused B.
Right, that there couldn't be some other explanation we're just, not seeing.
Precisely. Hume argued that our belief in cause and effect comes from a habit and from constant conjunction. We see things happen together so often that our minds automatically link them as cause and effect.
So my brain, just encountering these billiard balls over and over again, builds this little shortcut that says, ball A hits, ball B moves. That's just how it works.
Right, exactly.
But it's just a shortcut.
It's a shortcut. It's not an ironclad law of the universe.
Yeah, okay.
And that has huge implications.
Yeah.
It calls into question, the very basis of scientific inquiry, which relies on identifying these cause and effect relationships.
Right, because if we can't even trust our understanding of cause and effect, then what can we be certain about? Did anyone even try to answer that after Hume dropped that, philosophical bombshell?
Leave it to Immanuel Kant.
Okay.
Our final philosopher in this little deep dive to try to put the pieces back together in this new and, I think, revolutionary way.
Okay. I'm ready for the grand finale. We've gone from doubting everything to embracing experience.
Right.
To wondering if anything even exists outside of our own perception. What's Kant's big move?
So Kant actually thought that both the rationalists, like Descartes,
Right.
with their focus on innate ideas,
Yeah.
and the empiricists, like Locke and Hume,
Right.
with their emphasis on experience, were onto something.
Okay.
But they each only told part of the story.
So he's trying to like build a bridge then.
Exactly.
Between these two seemingly like opposing camps.
Exactly. He called it his Copernican revolution in philosophy.
Oh. Yeah.
Just like Copernicus shifted our understanding of, the entire cosmos.
Right.
By proposing that the Earth revolves around the sun, not the other way around.
Yeah.
Kant wants to revolutionize our understanding of knowledge.
I'm sensing an analogy here.
Yes.
If Copernicus dethroned the Earth, what's Kant dethroning in his philosophical revolution?
He's challenging this idea that our minds passively conform to the world.
Okay.
Instead, he says, what if the world we experience is shaped by the very structure of our minds? He's kind of flipping the script.
Okay.
Instead of asking, how does the world get into our heads? Right. He's asking, how do our heads shape the world we experience?
So instead of my senses just like feeding information into my brain is actually like organizing and filtering and even like adding to it.
Yes. He argued that we have these innate categories of understanding.
Okay.
Things like space, time,
right.
and yes, even causality.
Okay.
That are basically built into the very fabric of our minds.
Interesting.
These aren't things that we just learn from experience. They're the preconditions that make experience possible in the first place.
So it's not just that I encounter things and learn to recognize cause and effect. It's that my brain is set up to even understand that concept from the get-go.
It's like our default setting for experiencing the world.
Okay.
And Kant argued that these innate structures
are
what take the raw data of our senses and shape them into this meaningful world that we perceive.
Okay.
He called the world, as we experience it, shaped by our minds.
Yeah.
The phenomena and the world, as it truly is, independent of our minds.
Right.
He called the noumena.
Okay, so the phenomena is like the movie that my mind makes about the world, right?
Okay, I like that.
It's using its own editing software, special effects.
Okay.
And the noumena is like the raw footage.
Yes.
The actual reality just happening that we never get to see.
Exactly.
Because it's always going through my mind's lens.
A perfect analogy.
Right.
And here's the kind of the kicker. For Kant, he believed that, while we can study the movie of the phenomena all we want, we can never truly know the raw footage, the noumena, that thing in itself.
Yeah.
Because our minds are always shaping our perceptions.
So we're stuck then, forever in this theater of our own minds, and we can never really see what's truly out there.
Yeah. Kind of a humbling thought, isn't it?
It is humbling, yeah.
Yeah.
But in a way, I don't know, I find it kind of liberating too.
Interesting. How so?
Because if no one can ever really truly see the noumena, right? We're all just working with our own phenomenal experiences.
Yeah, we're all in the same boat.
Right. So it makes disagreements about reality seem a little, I don't know, less important in a way.
Interesting.
Because we're all just arguing about different interpretations of the movie.
I like that.
Yeah.
That's a really interesting way to look at it. It's we're all film critics with our own takes.
Right, exactly.
I like it.
Okay, so, wow, we really have been on a journey today.
We have.
From the evolving definition of a meter to, the mind-bending ideas of Descartes, Locke, Berkeley, Hume, and finally Kant.
It's quite a lineup.
It's really incredible to see how each of these thinkers is, building on, challenging, refining the ideas of the ones that came before.
It shows how these conversations in philosophy, they're not happening in isolation,
Right.
They're part of this ongoing dialogue.
It highlights how even, seemingly simple questions. Right. Literally, how long is a meter?
Right, which we all think we know.
We think we know.
Right.
Can lead to these, really profound reflections on, the nature of knowledge, reality, even just, the structure of our own minds.
It's all connected.
Yeah, it makes you realize there's this whole, universe of thought.
Absolutely.
Beneath the surface of just, our everyday lives. And on that note, I think we've given our listeners plenty to ponder today.
I think so, too. It really makes you wonder. If, as Kant suggests, we never experience reality directly, only our mind's interpretation of it,
Right.
then
Right.
what does that mean for how we understand the world and ourselves?
And what does that mean for how we treat each other? Right. If
Yeah.
everyone's experiencing their own unique version of reality, that's huge. That's something we could probably spend a whole other deep dive exploring.
Oh, absolutely. There's so much more to unpack there.
Well, on that note, until next time, thanks for listening and keep on diving deep.
Keep on questioning.